Let me introduce our guests once more. It's Glyn Maxwell, Jay Bernard, Fionă Maddox. My name is Yury Saprykin, and we're starting a discussion which is called How to Write About Music. I think every one of you knows how to start such a discussion properly. You should stand up and say, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It's the perfect start. Many generations of journalists try to impress their audience with this wisdom. And the sentence which is attributed to Frank Zappa, I think is absolutely wrong. Because, first of all, as we see in contemporary dance, some people certainly can dance even about architecture. Second, everybody knows that it is possible to write about music. And it is possible to write about music in different ways, in many different ways. And the people who take part in this discussion, Fionă Мэдdocks is a professional music critic, and Glyn Maxwell and Jay Bernard are poets. And it's certainly two different types of writing about music. So we'll try to find the common ground for this discussion, but maybe sometimes I will ask the different questions for different persons. And I'd like to start with the question for Glyn and for Jay. What is it to write about music in your case, in case of your poetry? How do you understand it? How do you can apply this sentence to your creative work?
I mean, we touched on this in the session just a second ago, where I was saying that I mean, dancing about architecture misses the point of dance and architecture, I think. Because you don't dance about architecture, you evoke a certain landscape, a certain concept or idea. And I think it's the same thing with poetry. We're not poeting about music, we're incorporating some of the aspects of music, having engaged and listened to it and moved emotionally by it. And also some of the forms or the devices of it. So rhythm, for example, can definitely be informed by music. History as well, metrics, meter, even just references that evoke a particular time and place. So for me, that's what I do, and I sort of almost self-consciously called my poems a songbook in the book to indicate to the reader that there is a melody or a lyric, that it's part of the live form. And if you read the book, it still stands as poetry, I hope. But there's a performative element as well, kind of like what David Keenan just said about the performative potentiality of any of his novels.
So it's writing as music?
No, it's just the subject matter, it's what informs it, it's the stuff, the substance, the atmosphere, the mood. But for me, it's not poetry as music, it's the song, or it's the poem, and sometimes it muddies, but there are two forms. There's the performance, and then there's the collection of poems. And I guess I make that distinction for deep psychological reasons that I won't go into now. But it helps me, it helps me, and I think it also helps the reader as well.
Well, I've been racking my brains for how I could take off on this subject. I sort of feel music's the one thing I would never write about, and have never written about. I can't imagine how that would work. I'd shy away from that. But of course, the poetry I write, or the career I've had, touches on music in all sorts of ways, which kind of aren't in that particular question. It's to me, poetry itself is just a parallel art, so you can find equivalents for keys, equivalents for treble and clef, treble and bass and clef. You can find equivalents for all the Italian descriptions of what the poem is like, but they're not the same thing. And then I was thinking about something that Brodsky said, actually, which I think is, of all the wise things he said, probably the most important to me. He said, in poetry, the role of the subconscious is played by euphony. And I realized that was something that I'd been trying to do, just naturally. I've always tried to do, because you read a poem, it has no subconscious. You don't know, you're not given its past. It comes to you as a person that you know nothing about. And that can even apply to your own things. So I think what he means is that the more beautiful, in the old sense, the more kind of euphonic it is, that is playing the role of a subconscious. That's playing the role of memory in some way. That's giving you the depth to something that's really coming at you flat. And I'm still exploring what he means by that, but I think it's really kind of central to what I do. So I think I write about music with a kind of real stretch of the preposition. So I write about music. That's all I'll say about that.
I'd like to ask Fiona, how did you start writing about music? How did you decide to make a career of music critic? What's the story behind it?
I spent quite a lot of time trying not to write about music, which is the truth. I realized very surprisingly early on that I did want to write about music, but then I spent many years not quite knowing how to do it, because professionally there are not many openings, and I had to earn a living, and the idea of turning up at a big newspaper office saying I'd like to be a music critic didn't seem to be the right way to go about it. But to cut a rather long story a bit shorter, I did other kinds of writing first, and then I was asked to be a music critic, and I said no so many times that I felt that I had to say yes. So it was a sort of calling in a way that I resisted and resisted, because it seemed to involve having a confidence that I didn't think I had.
Why did you resist? Weren't you sure that it will be a success, or what?
I think that's a sort of deep psychological question that we could be here with my not yet hired psychiatrist and psychologist sorting me out. I think really it was to do with feeling that there was a tradition of music criticism that expected you to have a fully formed view about music, and I still don't feel I have that fully formed view even now. And it happened to be a very male tradition, and that was also a question that people were not expecting. In fact, when I took my job at the Observer, one of my male colleagues said it would be very nice to hear what a woman thinks. And I don't know whether they really quite enjoyed the result.
We know that music can do many things, and music can do many things with the relationship to the text. It can be the source of inspiration, or the flow, the rhythmic and melodic flow that is built into the text, or the memorial device, or many things else. Jay, what part music is playing in the process of writing for you?
Yeah, in the process, well, I often write things from memory, rather than trying to write it, listening to it and then writing it, listening to it, because I don't think that works for me, and that's also not what I'm trying to do. I think it's really important to draw, for me anyway, because I'm not specifically trying to be like, the music is sort of a kind of a source but I'm not really trying to present that source accurately. I'm trying to present something informed by it, right? So, for example, one of the songs I'll do today comes from a rhythm I heard years ago, and it came back to me in altered form because I was trying to write this poem. And even though it comes from a completely different tradition to the one I was trying to write in, and then over time, as I was writing the poem I thought was dreadful to begin with, and then I was like, oh no, wait, it's a song. Or rather, what I'm trying to write is something in between, you know what I mean? This came out as a plinky plonky song first, and then I was like, oh, if I use this rhythm, it gives it the drive and the energy, and also it gives me the metric space that I'm craving, that I can't quite create for myself. So that was one of them. And then in the other song I'll also do is, it was very much, my dad used to make up these rhymes according to a very kind of like, shall we say, generic reggae rhythm. You know, it was just almost as if you were just going to sing like a little song to a kid. He would do it in this particular way, and that sing-song rhythm came back when I was trying to find a way to talk about the children, the young people who had perished in this fire, and somehow that memory of those tunes, which was informed by reggae, seemed like the rest of it. So I suppose you could say I draw on memory, and then I go back and listen to the original and see how they changed.
We've heard today your reading of the poems, of your poems. And can you please read some of your songs? Yes.
So these are two poems with a little bridge in the middle. They're called Songbook in the Book Search. How many times has Misty died? How many times has she given us life? How many children does Misty have? As many as the people here in this song. Hearing this song, I said they're hearing this song, I said they're listening in from beyond. Hearing this song, I said they're hearing this song, I said they're listening in from beyond. How many lovers does Misty have? As many as there are leaves on the trees. How many places has Misty lived? As many as there are names on the map. Names on the map, is there a names on the map? Is there a places that you can belong? Names on the map, is there a names on the map? Is there a places that you can belong? I haven't seen her, nor have you, not since the fire of 439. They said her daughter was gone 4 days. They wouldn't let her see the remains. And she came up in the morning and she went down in the evening and she came up with the rising of the sun. And she came up in the morning and she went down in the evening and she came up with the rising of the sun. And she went down in the morning and she came down in the evening and she went with the rising of the sun. And she came up in the morning and she went down in the evening and when I turned around she was gone. When I turned around she was gone. When I turned around she was gone. I haven't seen her, nor have you, not since the fire of 439. They said her daughter was gone 4 days. They wouldn't let her see the remains. And she came up in the morning, she went down in the evening, she came up with the rising of the sun. And she came up in the morning, she went down in the evening, and when I turned around she was gone. 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 Remember you were loved. Remember you were... I read about you. I read that you were... Remember that you were loved. Remember you were... I read about you. I read that you were... And these are people that you've never met. And these are places that you've never been. And these are things that you've never done. And these are people that you never knew.
So why does it feel like this happened to you? Say one step forward and a two step back. You say a three step forward and a six step back. You say a four step forward and a one step back. You say a one half forward and a one half back. You say a left side forward and a right side back. Both up left side, right side, up you changed it. Me say half the revolution upon the attack, but only half the solution to the things I'm in. Say, girl love reggae and girl love move. Why love reggae and them love up and go. The two of them are up and starting to move. Crowd gone quiet, people stop me on their food. And I'm watching them see this wicked MC. This beautiful girl all dressed up in green. Nails done nice, hair crisp, what you mean? The baddest little girl them ever did see. Me say a one step forward and a two step up. Me say a three step forward and a six step up. Me say a four step forward and a one step up. Me say a one half forward and a one half up. Me say the heat of the night, I come up through the floor. Black smoke arise, oh, them never did know. The people that jam and the young man a chop. Word fly from him lip like bomb by a gun. And the girl them a dance and the man them a rock. Drink 6 rum and black and the beat them a drop. Darkness descend and the moon gone black. Voices are called, say them half figure tone. Voices are called, say them half figure tone. Screaming begin and the people are shout. Me say screaming begin and the people are shout. Them a cover them head and a cover them no. Me say a one step forward and a two step up. Me say a three step forward and a six step up. Me say a four step forward and a one step up. Me say a one half forward and a one half up. Don't punish street, you see body face. Don't pick me fly through the air and mash up on the ground. Flames in my fly and a furious red. Boy fall from the window and you no say anything. Girl fall back inside, we no see her no more. No bright green dress up on the 3rd floor. Policeman come and fireman too. Them startled, them scared, them don't know what to do. Mother she a cry and she not have no shoes. Man them a look but to help them refuse. Friend them shocked by the scale I lost. Me say black smoke a bellow at the house in the cross. Me say black smoke a bellow at the house in the cross. Me say black smoke a bellow at the house in the cross. Me say blood a go run for the pain and the loss. Me say a one step forward and a two step up. Me say a three step forward and a six step up. Me say a four step forward and a one step up. Me say a one half forward and a one half back.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Glyn, I wonder if you sometimes imagine any of your works as a music, and if you did, what genre and what form of music would it be?
I was just formulating I've been formulating an answer to the question before, and this one come at me, and I have absolutely no idea what I'd say to that. I might try that later. I don't seem to fit into the topic terribly well today, but I was thinking about euphony and the subconscious, because actually I just woken up back to that thought again, and it set me off in all sorts of directions. And then there was what David said about loving putting letters together so they could make love, and they would bear meaning. And I was thinking that what a kind of a lyric poet does is that, but I think it also is putting words together that then bear beauty. So I think that the difficulty with a poet and with music is to do with that sort of being careful not to confront beauty too full on, so to confront euphony too full on, so that the rhymes are too full and they sit too easily and so on. But when you do that, when you find the place to do that, to sort of go for euphonic notes, or notes of beauty, old style, I would say, as they say about the calendar here, beauty old style. You are at least, what's important is that yourself is disappearing into the language and the history of the language. So you are kind of lying back into the history of your own language, where it found beauty in centuries before you, where it found beauty and so on. you're sort of receding from the foreground. And I tend to like writers who recede from the foreground, that kind of work. And you're letting the language play. You're letting the language play. And so I think that's how I've tried to work with music in my own verse. Going on to the actual question, it's too difficult a question to answer because I've written for opera. So I've written libretti and I've written songs. I've written words to be sung. I've been conscious they have to be sung. So it's hard to think in terms of musical genres. And my head is spinning with what Jay and David have brought to me today. I'm not a great expert in music. I'm really eclectic and I love all sorts of different things that don't actually add up to any coherent view at all. So I just like to lie back and just...
I'd just like to help Glyn here. That's my role. That I have, in my role as a critic, I happen to have heard 2 operas to which Glyn wrote the libretti. And although they weren't his prime poetic voice, they were stories told by other people first. I think in both cases, yes, opera novels.
Well, so you mean The Firework Maker's Daughter and Nothing. So The Firework Maker's Daughter is a Philip Pullman story for kids. In fact, it's, he said to me when I met him briefly on doing this, he said it was particularly special to him because it was about understanding that you're an artist as a child, and I think he wrote it for his child. So there was that, and then there was Nothing. Nothing is a Danish young adult novel that is extremely popular in most of Europe. It wasn't very well known in Britain, and I hadn't heard of it. But my composer, David Bruce, who wrote the music in both these cases, was telling me the story over the phone, and he got about 30 seconds in, and I said, we're doing that story. It's like a Lord of the Flies story where things go terribly badly for a lot of school children. So again, not my story.
But what I would say, if I were writing a review of it, which I think I probably did at the time, is that Glyn did what many librettists do not do successfully. He didn't put his own glory of the language in front of the need it had to serve the composer and work with the composer. And it's another subject, and it's not about poetry, and it's not about writing about music, but it's about providing music with words that work to be sung. And you need very, very spare language, which is very clear and direct. This is all very obvious stuff. But it's surprising how, although it seems obvious, again and again and again, I talk to composers who have had to cut the libretto that they've been lovingly sent by some, often poets, and they're double the length, because music sets language at a much slower pace, obviously, than we speak it. But what was so very clear about the librettos that I've heard of Glyn is that they were very succinct, and they really didn't try to be poetic. They tried to be robust and strong.
Consider me helped magnificently. Thank you. Well, Fiona's words on Nothing were extremely wonderful. It meant an awful lot to me. So it's a case just from the poets speaking to that I've had to learn as a poet how libretti, what to do as a poet. It's like different lessons going into the theatre, but going into libretti, you do less, you rely on vowels, you rely on repetitions, and you again, I think you let go a lot of the things you thought you were as a poet. You let go beauty, you let go high lyricism, you let go metaphor, you let go simile. And it means a lot to me that Fiona said all that in the paper. It was, I thought at the time, good to hear what a woman thinks.
We're paying each other later in cash.
getting back to the professional music critic type of writing about music, there is a problem. I think it's a problem for every music critic. The problem is that you certainly understand music much more deeply than most of your readers. You know how music works. You know how it is constructed. You know everything about form and structure and many different professional things. And you cannot write about it. How do you decide what to tell your readers and what not to tell? Where's the borders of your competence in your texts?
There are no borders. It's just one long incompetence. Well, first of all, I don't know all those things. I have studied music to a reasonable level, and I may have more grasp than people who haven't studied music, but I'm of the firm belief that you don't need to know the technicalities of music to approach it, to understand it, to be open to it. It might help in some particular examples of music which is more complex in its immediate structure, but it may also be that if you just listen, you can give yourself over it again and again, you will answer those questions yourself. So I think the question is more, if I hear a new piece of music that I've never heard before, which is a lot of silence, then what we call in English plinkety-plonk, which is a technical term. Plinkety-plonk is exactly, plinkety-plonk is what a lot of contemporary music can sound like on first hearing. How do I not say, well, use that phrase, for example, I'd probably be sacked. A different composer had written plinkety-plonk music, so I try not to hang on to my job. But I have to find a way of conveying something, so I do it incredibly inadequately. I listen as hard as I can. I listen like this, with my ears absolutely pinned back, and I sometimes might make notes, and often they're made, well, always they're made illegibly, because I'm usually looking, doing this, which doesn't result in something you can read. And often when I do manage to decipher it, I've written something like loud, which is really useless when you're going to write, or write a review, or harp, meaning there was a harp. I'm really revealing the secrets of the trade here. It's not showing me I've got a good light. But you can only do 2 or 3 things unless you're writing a very long review for a specialist musicological journal, which is not something I write for. I write for a newspaper, and I write relatively fast, sometimes the next day, sometimes a few days later. And I have to use up a large amount of my space, saying what it was, where it was, who did it. And if it's a new piece, which isn't the only thing that's difficult to write about, but it can be very difficult to write about, I do ask for a copy of the score. But often that's only to try and reassure myself that what I thought was a harp was indeed a harp. Because you can hear things, but you can't go back. You can't rewind the sound. And it's the immediacy of trying to work out what you've heard, and that's the challenge. But I could go on.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Jay and Glyn, as readers, when you read the texts about music, reviews or anything, what is it important for you? What makes it significant for you? What do you find in it?
I'll be very quick on this. So Jay can prepare. I'll make it better answer. I don't get anything from reading about. Mostly from reading about music, unless I know it already. I find it really hard to piece it together. I think they're two citadels that are quite far apart in a way, so it's quite hard to. So I want to know if it was good and it was worth hearing. I'm really overwhelmed by the multitude of music. I discovered Spotify, and I realised I could just put all my favourite songs like on one thing, and on a little cylindrical thing, and it would just play them all day. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I leave it to others. To me, encyclopedic knowledge of the music is, or everything. I've been left behind a long time ago by changes in music. I just like what I hear, and now you can go straight to a laptop and find out what it is that's playing right now on the radio, and you can add it to your big cylindrical Spotify thing. So that's I like great reviews and I like bad reviews. Just in terms of what you read.
I always I like things that maybe similar to you can tell me how it relates to what I already know or something I might know. I guess that's because I don't know anything really about music reading. I think there are some people who are real they know everything, they've got every track, every vinyl, every blah blah blah. I'm not like that at all. I just absorb it, and then usually it comes out as a distortion, a few months later or years later. So I like things that can do that. But then when it comes to certain sensibility, I guess, with certain kinds of music, so for example with reggae, with dub, which are the sounds that I think are most ornamental to me. I like things that can take me somewhere else. So for example, in this book, which I recommend you all read, House of Lords and Commons, Ashley Hutchinson, talks about Lee Scratch Perry, and Lee Scratch Perry burned down the studio from which he made loads of hits. And just like an example of how he describes it, he says, "The genie says build a studio. I build a studio from ash and make it out of peril and slum things. I alone when blood and bullet and all Christ fucking American dollar politicians talk the pressure down to nothing. When the equator's confused and coke bubbles on tin build a cemented wreath." And just goes on like that, and it's like that's Lee Scratch Perry to a T, right? And there's just these wonderful refrains as well that he uses. And he kind of both describes the act of burning, but also the act of archiving, and also this kind of like godlike figure that I think Lee Scratch Perry kind of is, and also sees himself as, and also Bob Marley as well, who was the kind of god that he constructed, because Lee Scratch Perry produced his sound, basically. So stuff like that, where what I know is kind of changed and defamiliarized and then reformed, and I can enter it again.
Fiona, don't you feel that the mission of music criticism nowadays is somehow changing? Comparing it to the 10 years or 20 years ago, the people find the recommendations in Spotify and Apple Music, and they don't need to read the reviews, or there are so many words about music in the blogs online all over the internet. So how do you see what's important in your work, not in general, but today?
You mean how do I stop myself being redundant?
No. No. How do you change thinking about this work?
Some of you who came to the talk this morning might hear some repetition, but I'll try not to.
Yes.
But still, the essence of it is the same. It hasn't changed since this morning. Well, one of the simple things that's difficult is that we now, as newspaper critics, have to give stars to a review, as if it's, the best orange juice from the local supermarket. Which one should I choose? And that is agony. I mean, it is really painful to decide because you know that for many people, they are not going to read the beautiful prose that you constructed so lovingly. They are going to look at the number of stars and move on. So that's a performer or a composer's whole output judged on my stars, which is a responsibility I do take seriously, and I'm aware that I probably give a lot of, we have 5 stars. It's a very subtle thing. Nobody ever gets 1 star, as I do occasionally. But I know that some of my colleagues on other newspapers, for example, I hide this, the Times newspaper, has an editor who has pretty much told his critics that he doesn't want things with 3 or 4 stars, because that's kind of not really on the fence. It's got to be 2 stars or 5 stars, which is a shocking thing to say. Either really it's good or bad. We don't want this kind of, oh, that was right on one hand and on the other. I love on the one hand and on the other, because life is on the one hand and on the other for many, many things. Of course, there are very good and very bad, and when the time comes for very good or very bad, you give them the stars accordingly. But it's a recognition of the fact that the response is very quick, and the reader's attention is very short. And I think that's a major way in which things have changed. It's a long debate. It's a debate about the whole of criticism and how you write about music. But I want to be an advocate on the whole, which doesn't mean I can't be at times against something, disappointed by something. But I won't play that 2 or 5 stars game. I'd rather give up and be pushed into that particular corner.
There is a beautiful music magazine, one of my favorite music magazines of all time. It's called The Wire, the magazine for which David Keenan worked for a long time. And there is a section on the last page which is called Epiphany. Different writers, different people writing about the moment of extreme divine revelation connected with music, about the extraordinary music experience which changed the perception of music for them. Can you, every one of you, remember such a moment in your life, the moment of the music epiphany? Thank you.
I think I've had loads of those. One is more kind of technical epiphany, and the other one is a kind of like a creative epiphany. So the technical epiphany is that because I grew up in the early 2000s, the internet was still an anarchic place. And the dark web and the above board web were still sort of one and the same. So anyway, I used to download all my music from LimeWire and from Kazaa. I never used Napster, actually. It was a bit crappy by the time I got to it, because it was really the early 90s and Napster was a thing. And it was amazing because I would just type in my favourite stuff, and because it was so skeezy, like all kinds, like a lot of porn would come up, and then like in between would be like Eminem, which is what I was looking for, or like Radiohead or whatever. But as a result of that, I found like these bootlegs from Bob Dylan, for example, that like a lot of people, including hardcore Dylan fans of friends of mine, had never heard, like Moonshiner, for example. And I kind of like discovered I could download whole albums and like create. It was terrible. It was what destroyed the music industry. But it was great. It's why we have Spotify now, right? So they came up with a different model. So that was my like revelation as a kid. I didn't go to the record store. I didn't have money to begin with, but also that just wasn't the culture that I grew up with. But then I think the like creative epiphany was when I really discovered film music. So weirdly, Ennio Morricone was like the guy, right? So I was like 15 or so. I was like, this guy is the shit. This thing's like westerns. It was like incredible. And the reason I enjoyed it is because was for reasons that I now criticise. Obviously, I don't enjoy it in the same way because it was like this kind of like frontier, right? And you think about some of the really like just even the cliche famous ones like everybody knows it, and it just captures you, right? Or like. It's just incredible. And that was coincided, I think, with my interest in film. The thing that really like captured my imagination was a film called Twilight City. I talk about it all the time. It's really boring, but if you can find a copy of this film, to watch it, and watch it not just for the visuals, but for the soundtrack by Trevor Matheson, because it's like a whole score, but it's all made up of like city sounds and like things you can't quite hear, and then there's like the tabla comes in, and it's absolutely incredible, and it really changed my idea of what film is as well.
I think you're probably asking the question in a slightly biographical way, which I need a lot longer to think about, and I have been thinking. But I think I sympathise with Glyn saying that there isn't a moment, because in a sense, every epiphany is when you think you're hearing something that is the best you've ever heard. And that happens not with a boring frequency, but a thrilling frequency for me. That if I hear a performance of The Rite of Spring, and it's a brilliant performance, it's the best performance I've ever heard. And it cancels out, well, it doesn't cancel out, it adds to the sum of my understanding of that music. And that is an almost constant journey, and that's why I love to go on this journey of exploration. And there are pieces that I heard that I could probably say, yes, that moment in my youth, teenage years, whatever, that, I mean, for example, Brahms' Symphony No. 1, it's a standard repertoire piece. I first discovered it when I was about 15 and couldn't believe how wonderful it was. And then didn't really go on thinking about it, but many, many, many years later, not so long ago, I was in Oxford in the Sheldonian Theatre, which is a beautiful theatre, terrible place for music, but a beautiful, exquisite 18th, 17th, 16th, 17th century building, and very uncomfortable seats. But it was the 1st of May, and the Berlin Philharmonic goes to a city, European city, I think a world city, every 1st of May, and plays a concert. And Daniel Barenboim was conducting Brahms' First Symphony. And the whole building was vibrating because it's a bit bigger than this, but it only seats a few hundred people. And to have this glorious, streamlined sound coming yards, meters from me, I was absolutely taken with it. And that became an epiphany, but it was a piece I'd known most of my life.
I'd like also to ask you about your books. You've written 2 biographies of the great composers, but it's very different composers from different times. It's Hildegard von Bingen and Harrison Purcell. What's common for you between these 2 figures?
Well, this is something that I know this is a public conversation, but it is something I will be talking about tomorrow morning. So
sorry.
I will just answer quite
Spoiler
briefly. Yes.
of tomorrow's discussion.
Otherwise, I'll have to think of something else to say tomorrow. Yes, I think they're both made-up forms. They're not conventional biographies, I would say that. One is about someone who who lived 10 centuries ago, and one is by someone who's alive now. And so neither of them lend themselves to a conventional biography, but that comes back to the way I write, I think, and that's what I'll be talking about tomorrow. Yes.
I think we can go to the questions from the audience. Do you have something to ask?
Well, I have a question about the following. It often happens to critics in movies. Sometimes they give very bad reviews. Time goes by and their opinion change. When Stravinsky presented his ballet Holy Spring, so there were no good reviews. Later, people started to appreciate. Do such things happen in the sphere of musical criticism? That just reviews start to be so-and-so, and time goes by and you change your opinion? Or just it never happens like that?
I think that's a question that's a very big question that can only be answered by all the critics in the world. I would say I change my mind all the time. Yeah, I think you go, you listen to the event in that moment, and you give it your full concentration, and never mind what you said yesterday. And if you said last week that you hated X composer, and today you're suddenly loving it, fantastic.
Does it happen in the 21st century when critics first write negative reviews and later they change and they say sorry, but after some time goes by, or it never happened? Well, yeah, you said it's with you, but have you read such reviews, like just different reviews?
Have I read such reviews? I try not to read other reviews. I mean, I do occasionally, that's not a clever answer. I really try to read other things, not other reviews. It probably does happen.
Any questions?
A question to Fiona. You said that you were trying to avoid writing about music and writing critical articles. Now you are doing it. So, have you ever had doubts about your decisions? So are you happy with your decisions that you changed from other themes and books to writing articles?
I think one always has doubt, yes. I particularly have doubt if I haven't understood something, because I think I'm failing in some way, which doesn't mean that everything, therefore, is perfect and it's just my failure to understand, and that it would be great if only I could understand it. But I think if you don't respond to something, then that's really when the job gets tough, because you have to ask so many questions about what you're not getting, what you're not understanding, what you're not liking or hearing or seeing, and that's when you have to be vigilant all the time. You can never switch off, and I always have this image of, as I said earlier, sitting up to listen. And when I'm not on duty, I sometimes find myself sitting back, and I'm not listening properly, and I have to be on guard.
I have a question for Jay. It's about the song about Mrs. D. Was it written as a song to be performed like you performed it, or was it written to be read on paper?
Both.
Could you tell us more about it? What kind of performance? Is it a larger kind of, is it a play? Is it a what?
It's the book Surge, so it appears in the collection Surge alongside all the other pieces, and it's called Songbook 2, and the whole point is that it's called Songbook 2, but there isn't a score in the book or anything, it's just a couplet, and I wanted it to be able to sort of exist as a sort of playful, almost naive, sort of faux, innocent poem, because I wanted to play around with poetry, and what that means. It's sort of closeness to sort of almost Hallmark cards, I'm very sorry for your loss, these sorts of things that I think poets find hard to, because they're just a bit, maybe they don't often get the thing, but they're sort of an exchange of thought. So I try trying to get at that kind of thing and then sort of work it into something else. Though if you don't see and read the poem, then you never hear the melody, but you can imagine. You can really think up the song yourself or imagine it, something like that. I'm not. I think there's two different experiences I was trying to create. One live and one on the page.
And is Serge performed in theatre?
Yes, I did a solo show of it at the end of June.
It's more a question to all of you. I've seen some books about music, supported by music in different formats that experiment with new media, like books about radio stations with QR codes linking to certain channels or podcasts or programs, or vinyl audiobooks where texts are mixed with music. Have you ever experimented with new media and or mixing formats, or have you thought about it, or do you know successful examples of it? Thank you.
No. Jay.
Yes, I have. Yeah, totally. I've done loads with other forms. It's sort of kind of what I do, I think. Poetry is like one strand of it. Like the latest thing I'm doing is I've been recording city soundtracks because I've written a poem that is just out of earshot. And you kind of put on a headset in VR and you walk through this sort of city, but it's not a city, but it is. You hear these city sounds and you kind of move through. And I kind of like the idea of a poem just out of earshot, or like when you're kind of walking through a place or it's a new place and you hear things, or like here, for example, I've realised that words that say pectola to me say restaurant, things like that, where it's like double, So that's the whole idea, and the poem just out of earshot is supposed to be like a kind of listening in. Also in film, like I think one of the things I want to talk about tomorrow at least is what it means as a poet coming in and trying to work with film and to create soundtracks that are to sort of that have a slightly different sensibility, or like cutting things differently. So I made a film called Something Said that is a very much an essay poem film, whatever that is, where I was trying to kind of, I think what you said about the unconscious in euphony is bang on the mark. Something about you get at it by euphony, and I think euphony is something sounding good in concert with another thing, right? So I think the interdisciplinary aspect maybe comes from there as well. Yeah.
I found a way to get into this. What Jay says about poetry just out of earshot, the kind of central sound, image, sound, whatever it is, essence in Robert Frost is the idea of the sound of sense, which he explained as that you could understand the sense of something you could hear through a wall where you couldn't make out any of the words, but you could, by the rising falling intonations of the words, you could work out what the meaning was. And his poetry was full of that, and it was a really kind of central idea for him. So this is more about sound than it's about music, but someone whose brain is a bit clearer right now could probably join the dots together. But this is something I tried to learn from Frost, that the sound of sense, that the sound of that this is sort of beyond actual words, beyond actual meaning, is a human sound which is quite easy to decode. And I guess that's what music is trying to do, is trying to represent that. So perhaps on a certain level, poetry is trying to represent that beyond the words you choose. I'm obviously kind of just somewhere in the middle of this journey, so it's not a finished thought, as you can tell.
I think you're right because we do often talk about musicality, and there is the idea that if you listen to the sound, then the sense will take care of itself. In poetry, I think it's a really common idea. And I also think maybe this talk should have come with a question mark at the end. It should have been like, how to talk about, write about music. Because I think the anxiety that we're feeling is maybe where the juice is, more than some kind of like specific knowledge. I think there's a kind of wrenching with musicality and with, like you say, how close or far we come from hitting the kind of rhyme or the pleasant sounding thing dead on. And I also think, like, even for myself, like, the music is actually a dangerous place, right? So the music can sometimes overwhelm the poetry. And what does that mean? You know what I mean? Especially as people who regularly get up and read it. What is it? And we're often imposters in spaces too, like in theatre spaces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's music just main lines to emotions, isn't it? In a way that poetry, I suppose, is working with sound and also with meaning. This is very obvious stuff that I'm just thinking at the age of 56. I'm just figuring out. But even when you stand up and sing beautifully, I sort of, I've got like 1,000 poems that I could do, and I think that's access to something that a poem hasn't got. However good it is, I could also, could read like Keats or Shakespeare. It still doesn't have the same access that a song has. It's a very different citadel, and I think that's why it's kind of a struggle with to ride the conversation, because they seem to me just shining citadels across a plane, poetry and music, and I find it hard to make the connections.
It's, sorry, could I just say, some hand. It's interesting that someone like Schubert, who wrote 500 and something other songs, didn't always set the greatest poetry. I mean, he set some well-known poets, but his best songs don't relate to whether he's also setting the best texts, because the music, for better or worse, and in Schubert's case, I think we can always say better, takes its own rhythm, and even if it's responding to the rhythm of the text of the song, of the poem. And it's interesting how many composers have almost willingly taken rather bad poetry and set it to music. There's a big history of that. Although Benjamin Britten set some really fantastically sophisticated poetry, and of course a lot of Shakespeare's songs, written as songs, have been set by composers.
I think that Shakespeare's songs are the target to hit, whether it be sucks, there's suck. I think because of my work with libretto over the years, trying to write songs for living composers and trying to write new words for new libretto for Magic Flute, and so all of this, swimming in all these kind of oceans, is like, I want to try and write, because I say in my book on poetry, I say that, all great songs look like nothing on the page. They don't work on the page because they work with music as opposed to silence. And of course, as soon as one says that, one wants to disprove it, because that's my temperament. And so I've been working towards trying to write a poem that satisfies me as a poem and could be set to music. And this is, like whether it's Shakespeare or Burns or Tom Moore or the people who did that fantastically well. And I've got my first attempt. I'll read it tomorrow on my thing. It sounds a little bit like it was written by a very sweet 12-year-old, and I'm really proud of it. So I'm just saying that, just so you don't burst my bubble. But I'll give it a go tomorrow.
Don Patterson in his opus Magnus Opus. I don't know if
It's a very big book.
It's really fat book. It's really fat. I got halfway through it. He says, like, he talks about music and feeling and all that, and he did this really wonderful thing that I really remember. He said, that music is how feeling sounds. And then he said, and feeling is just how feeling feels. And I thought that was amazing, because it's kind of true. And what does that then mean for music and feeling? Because I slightly disagree with you actually that a poem can't do what singing can do, because I've seen poets do things that songwriters or singers can't do. And I think it's something to do with how you access the feeling. I think the feeling that the music does or can do is space, time. It marks time in a slightly different way. You know, like you were saying, it stretches the word in a slightly different way. But I think that can be achieved. And I think Rufus Wainwright's setting of sonnet 129, 129, is one of the best ones I've ever learned. It's When in Disgrace with Fortune and Men's Eyes. It's an absolutely incredible version, and the poem is also incredible.
No, but they're just different. They're different roots to the heart, aren't they? One ends up just with Anglo-Saxon words saying heart and feeling, and then silence.
Glyn, just to come back to your point about words, poetry and music being two separate citadels across the valley, how do you feel when you hear your words performed from the libretto, performed in the opera? Do you feel that you've been given a key to the other citadel?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the experience of nothing, for example, the experience of Magic Flute. Yeah, I felt I'd been given, pretty much like you say, I felt I'd been admitted to the other citadel, and me as myself as poet was absent from the experience. Myself as librettist was present, and that was a really different feeling. It's a nice question because I never actually had to think about that before. That's how it was.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Glyn. And we'll meet again in a few minutes near the hotel. And thank you, everybody.